OMGM. We're back with Super Team Germany and the Media Guild. Today's episode will be when software pays x402 and the cultural shift of the agentic web. We're going to dive into that in a second. First of all, what's the Media Guild? The Media Guild focuses on how storytelling, messaging, and narrative designs connect the audiences with on-chain products, communities. We're here to help projects translate creative energy into stories, build the community and the movements, and we will draw inspiration also from current events across the Solana and Web3 ecosystems, from hackathons, for example, and grounding conversations in the real activity, shaping the on-chain communities that we have on Solana. And now let's dive in.
Yeah, so introducing ourselves, I'm one of your hosts, Sarika Milliken. You just heard from Lucas Huitas. And we've got our special guest here, Rish Sharma from the Solana Foundation. And we're super excited to talk with you today because this topic is going to change everything. So x402, it came in hot to the scene about, like 4 months ago? Maybe not even.
Yeah, not even. It's super excited to be on today and chat everything x402. I think this has been like one of the most fun things to kind of like see like a lot of traction and velocity on the Solana ecosystem over the past few months, literally just since the end of October. So I think we're officially like 2.5 months in to kind of like the real core development. But yeah, looking forward to the convo today.
Yeah, absolutely. And so would you mind telling us a bit about what you do at the Solana Foundation with AI?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm kind of head of AI product and growth over at the Solana Foundation. And so what that kind of looks like is thinking about kind of like what are the relevant products and features that we, the Solana blockchain, kind of need capabilities and performance for to be very competitive, kind of within the AI space more broadly. And so that's kind of like collecting feedback and liaising with kind of some of these more AI native teams, like folks like Google and Anthropic and OpenAI and others, to think about what kind of products can we build from like the blockchain or the Solana ecosystem that will be relevant to them. And then the second side of the job is thinking about, okay, like what are the ecosystem teams that are building AI products within Solana? How do we support them? How do we amplify the products that they're putting out, make them more competitive, put them in front of partners that maybe we can get to that they need some support and help in? And what are the new features and sets that people are really thinking about that are very important and critical that we want to drive growth in Solana? And so, over the past few months, as kind of x402 was launched in May, we had Solana support in August, and then we really saw the ecosystem start to pick up in October. I've been working very closely with, different ecosystem teams on kind of brainstorming ways that we can accelerate growth, support them, do hackathons, community events, all different kind of things to basically, build the future of agentic payments on top of Solana.
Nice. That sounds super interesting, and I can't believe that it's less than a year because lots has happened. Maybe, or probably not everyone listening to this knows what x402 is. Maybe you can give them a explanation.
Yeah, for sure. So basically, whenever they were first creating the internet, they created a bunch of status codes that could basically be used as responses whenever you try to hit a web server. So one of the most popular ones is, HTTP 404, which happens whenever you enter a URL and the web page doesn't exist. Like this is something that, everyone here has seen, like a 404 for an address that, doesn't exist, or a web page is no longer supported. One of these status codes that was created way back then was HTTP 402, which is basically a payment required status code. So what that means is a client can basically charge a server who's trying to access a web page some amount of payment if you want to visit a web page. This status code was created, and for a really long time, nobody really used it. It was one of those things that existed, but didn't actually have any usage other than it just was there. And then I think like actually or like 4 or 5 years ago, people started messing around with the 402 status code. A team from Lightning Network actually like built like L402, which is basically, how can you use a payment token to basically access a web page. And the Coinbase development team in May basically formalized the standard and put it out more broadly on how you can kind of create a payment token using a blockchain or an off-chain system to verify that, a client or a user had paid to access like a certain amount of web content. So you can kind of think of it as this internet native payments protocol that allows any web service to charge for access to its APIs and content, but without having the user create any accounts or manage any subscriptions. So you can basically access a web page without signing up for an API key. And that's like really, really exciting because it unlocks like a bunch of use cases in the world of agents using the internet and in the world of charging for microservices and micropayments on the internet. These are things that have been talked about for a really long time. And, X402 technically kind of unlocks a lot of this stuff. So yeah, like the CDP team has really kind of like led the charge in developing and formalizing the standard. And yeah, like Solana is basically one of the native ecosystems in which X402 is supported. And since its launch in the summer, we've seen the Solana ecosystem kind of like take this new standard and absolutely run with it, where today we have millions of transactions processed over X402 on Solana, more than any other ecosystem, millions of dollars in volumes weekly over X402 on the Solana ecosystem. And it's numbers that are starting to kind of become pretty exciting here. So it's like over 35 million transactions total, over $10 million in volume, over 10,000 buyers. We're seeing about 300% month over month growth in terms of activity. And just to give you a frame of the scale, like on certain days, we'll see X402 transactions be 1% of all non-voting transactions on the Solana blockchain. And so this is like some serious growth, and into 2026, I only expect these numbers to increase.
And did you expect them in the first place?
I mean, so I remember first reading about X402 and thinking, this is something that is very, very cool. And then, we shortly after it launched got support on Solana, and that was definitely something exciting. I think it becoming its own ecosystem in a sense of, all of these like projects like working on it. I think it's hard sometimes to predict the amount of velocity that you'll see like new primitives adopted in crypto. But I mean, Solana has the best ecosystem of builders and developers. So in that sense, it's not surprising, but would I have predicted it? Probably not. Yeah.
Well, what's crazy to me, because I come from the journalism industry originally, and obviously there's like a huge need for micropayments in that field
Yes.
specifically. And so I've just been wondering why it took so long for it to develop into something that's actually like used, because it's this relic from the past, and I'm a sucker for stories.
Yeah.
And it feels like it's just a time portal, like going back to the old
Yeah.
HTTP days. But
Yeah.
like, what happened then? Why didn't anyone use it? Because
Yeah.
they used 404 and some of the other ones.
I think that's a great question. And I think in some sense, and even like, the reason why like CDP and like I think like people are interested in 402 right now is because like we're transitioning kind of like where, like we've been in kind of like a human use internet since its existence, like in the 90s, where it's a human who's kind of like interacting with servers, searching for content and looking to access tools. And there's kind of like something fundamental about how humans operate that, like for whatever reason, like we don't like these micropayment type systems. And like it's just not been the most effective way for publishers to kind of monetize content. Everything has moved to the subscription model, right? So like when you think of something like, accessing news publications like Bloomberg or the Financial Times or the New York Times. Like that's all like a monthly subscription model. And I think like that's like just been what has worked. And even if you think about kind of like more like programming enabled systems, like it's going to be like through APIs where you're like you'll pay credits. But you know, as like I think what's really necessitated this kind of like shift in how we pay for things over the internet is as we've like moved from systems where web pages and websites are all designed for kind of like humans first to kind of like now today, like if you want to say like learn about like some new topic that is coming in current events, like maybe one of the first places that you go to is a chat interface like chat or Gemini or Perplexity or something like that, and research the topic. And you're kind of like going through this LLM agent interface that's pulling relevant context from across the internet, but you, the user, are never actually going to that web page. And it kind of like changes the model that could work here because there's no reason for a agent to be on a subscription service, right? Like that's a business model that kind of like came about for, yeah, kind of like a human-centric web. But it's kind of the shift to an agent-centric web that I think is kind of like making X402 more relevant in today's world.
That's super interesting. Maybe let's go a bit deeper there, because what's really interesting for people to also understand probably is what does it actually mean for an AI agent to own crypto or execute payments autonomously?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, like, and to your point, right? So it's like there's multiple things, right? It's like, what is the payment system that works for AI agents in terms of kind of like how are they paying for their content? Whether it's going to be something like through micropayments, where suddenly this model might make sense. To additionally, like you have this question of like, what's the most easy to use financial system for these kind of agents, right? If you think of kind of like how you pay for content on the internet today, it all relies on kind of credit cards and these sort of systems that have fundamentally been built for humans, right? And linking up an AI agent with a credit card is not necessarily as intuitive. Like, where are the security guarantees? Where are the guardrails for this? Like, is the credit underwriter like taking the risk of an agent, like malfunctioning and paying more for a service than like they should be? These are all like questions that haven't necessarily been answered. And I think like as we've seen kind of the rise of stablecoins as like this really elegant solution for different kinds of cross-border and FX type payments that people are making to each other all the time, I think you can kind of like extend this use case of like, how does it make sense for agents to kind of spend money and manage money if they're outside of the existing financial system today with like credit cards and ACH accounts? Like how would an agent get paid, right? Say I want to pay an agent for a service today. Where is that balance being managed? Like how will they manage kind of like the money that they earn? And this is where like I think there's been like since pretty much like the beginning of last year, this interest of like how do we make agents more financial actors? And there are different wallet systems, embedded wallet systems that people have been building. A lot of early experiments kind of in this space so far. And I think like the building blocks of kind of like what the foundation of this like 3 to 5 years from now is kind of like happening today. So, for me, it's like probably the most exciting space that I can kind of spend time in this space of crypto and AI and payments.
Couldn't agree more. I thought I was going to have to build a micropayment system myself for what I'm working on, which is journalism infrastructure.
Yeah.
And then X402 came out, and I was like, okay, somebody already did it. I can just plug it in. This is perfect.
I mean, it's also because like this started coming up whenever like LLM started becoming really big, but like a lot of the work that artists and writers like had kind of put on the internet was like used as context for pre-training or used even in context for kind of like post-training for pulling information from the web. And you had a bunch of people who were kind of like left out of the value creation of like this massive technology. And that's fundamentally like not fair, and like that pushes incentives of people away from collaborating, right? Like I remember still like with GPT-3, it was like a really big thing whenever they kind of like trained the model over all these open source GitHub repos. And there was this movement of people kind of like close sourcing more of their code, because not because they didn't want to share it with other people even, but because like there's this belief that, you know, like what is the point of like me kind of like open sourcing this code if it's just going to be used by like some like model to basically be trained and replace the work that I fundamentally can do. And so, yeah, creating new financial systems and payment systems for, you know, how people can contribute to different things as, you know, AI becomes a bigger technology in all of our lives. It's a very, very interesting problem. And yeah, I'm sure you see a lot of that.
Yeah, I was just talking with a developer friend about this chilling effect in the industry with the closing of this company that like was on a really good
Yeah.
track. Tailwind.
Tailwind.
Or
Yep.
I don't know if they're closing. I don't want to spread fake news, but I was reading that they're having some
Yeah.
issues when they were kind of like in the predominant space for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Do
No, I
you
mean,
think
mhm.
do you think X402 has the ability to kind of like turn things around for creators and really move things away from this kind of like scrape now, answer for the consequences later in lawsuits, and start to empower creators, including developers who have like traditionally not been in the like the lower class of creators, like writers and
Yeah. Yeah.
illustrators that were the first ones to fall in the AI craze. But do you think this can help turn the situation around so that we don't have this kind of like job frenzy where everyone's in panic mode?
I mean, I think that there's like, I think different people will have different views on this question. You know, there are like some people who I think like really fundamentally believe that, you know, what productive work humans can do over the next 5 years is just gonna like pale in comparison to performance of like AIs. And so in that world, like, and this is where like, you know, you have the kind of like this is like the San Francisco libertarian worldview of kind of like like UBI is kind of like built like economic productivity is going to be like massively like improved by AI, but like without the need of human inputs for it. And essentially like we can reconstruct a new society where, you know, everybody is okay, but like the the fundamental work that humans are doing is not that important, right? And like if you have a problem that needs to be solved, like it's a question of like how much compute you're going to put into it, right? Like because like fundamentally some sort of AI enabled system is going to be driving like an outcome. Uh that's one worldview. Like I don't necessarily know like if I fall into that camp or hope for that camp. Like I really hope and believe that, you know, like AI is one of the greatest technologies of like our generation that we're seeing the birth of. And I mean like humans are always gonna figure out a way to kind of innovate and create with new tools and new systems that kind of come out about them. And so I guess like driving more specifically like to your question of like how like creators and different kinds of people will be able to monetize in like this new system. I think that this is like possible, and I think this is like in small ways like starting to happen. Like even in the big tech space, you're seeing things like, you know, Perplexity launched a creator fund in which like I think like there's like a some pool of money, and depending on like how many user searches like someone's like link or like content might come up in a response or answer, they'll like be paid like some fractional amount that, you know, over time could increase like be like a whole new business model. Like I think in the creator economy, social media has completely changed the way that people monetize and build their content. Like YouTube, TikTok, like Instagram, like it's become like now the major feed of how people can, you know, monetize attention and views and clicks and stuff like that. And I think with AI we'll probably see a similar thing. And I think like what could be really cool with this is like, 402 could be a payment system which is used like universally, which is a very easy way for like both users to pay creators and creators to get paid.
That's super interesting. Thinking about that, I have a background in the music industry, and there we've
Yeah.
seen lots of great Web3 ideas
Yeah.
in terms of music and paying creators, but most of them closed by now or are not
Sure.
really reaching
Yeah.
the masses because
Yeah.
people don't get it. Do you think that x402 can help there in getting more adoption also with those with the easier way for projects to implement microtransactions?
Yeah, I think that for music it's kind of it's kind of hard because I think like fundamentally it's all about like how is the user accessing content? And like today still like to like when I also like I'm also a musician. I love to listen to music all the time, and the interface which I'm doing that through is like mostly through like a subscription service, right? Which is like Spotify or maybe use Apple Music. And the other thing is like they also control discovery for this, right? So like the actual like content creation is very tightly controlled like through these sort of systems. I think like where an x402 type model like sees disruption like most quickly and soonest is kind of like the first layer is really going to be kind of like at these like API level services where it's like today like if you're paying for an API for something and it's easier for a user to consume as like a 402, that's fundamentally like going to be replaced. Or like say like you can't even access an API. So like what are some of the most popular services and servers in X402 today? So there was like one team that I was talking to recently called Block Run AI. And basically what they've done is they've hosted multiple inference endpoints for all different kinds of LLMs as a 402. So OpenAI, like Gemini, Claude Opus, that is basically like you can like hit as a 402 endpoint and receive like AI inference tokens back, right? To a user in the US, that's not a big deal, right? If I'm a programmer and, I just have my own OpenAI account, I can just pay with my own credits. But, there's like huge geographies where you can't create an OpenAI account, right? Like in China, China is a massive market for OpenAI credits. And there's like this gray market of users that, can't sign up for the official API. And this is a way for them to basically be able to kind of like access this API. And so that's like a massive use case of kind of like where does X402 kind of like plug a hole that's kind of like missing in this space right now. And so I think like we'll start first and foremost with kind of like these API services that kind of like see a small but growing base of users that either can access their API or the second thing, like, totally had a great tweet about this the other day about kind of like, like having like trouble setting up like an API like in a Cloud Code environment. And, the next generation of developers and users are all going to be like programming in ways that are very different than like the programmers of today. And if it's, difficult for them to set up and manage API keys and stuff like that, it's going to be a much more seamless business model to be able to just like hit an endpoint with 402. And so I think like it's actually going to be a competitive edge for teams that are able to kind of like just make their web services like easiest to kind of like use with this new system.
The future is going to be so wild, and it sounds like there's a lot of competition already, and teams kind of like different companies all kind of like eyeing the space and seeing who's going to be the one, who's the leader.
Yeah.
So why is Solana going to be the leading blockchain company in this space?
Yeah, I mean, so and I've talked about this with some of the other people, at Solana and at Coinbase and like in the Ethereum ecosystem too. the way that I see this problem is not even, like Solana versus all the other crypto companies or blockchains. It's really like crypto and blockchains versus, the existing payment infrastructure of the world today, right? Because there's going to be like multiple camps of kind of like how people are thinking about agentic payments. So like x402 is just one of these. Like there's like Google has released AP2, which is their own payment system, which is like backwards compatible with x402, but like they're driving in their own kind of separate direction. Stripe is like working very closely on ACP with OpenAI and some other folks. So there are these different kind of large, big tech companies that are all seeing like, the future of like the consumption layer of the internet is moving from humans to agents, and we need to build like really good payment systems for these agents. It's going to be a massive economic opportunity, and crypto is just going to be one of these ways to do it. So I'd say like first and foremost, the biggest problem is like, how do we break x402 outside of just the crypto natives who are building this to kind of like a wider audience of users and people and developers? What's like fantastic about kind of like the crypto ecosystem, and especially the Solana ecosystem, is like the level of kind of like excitement to try, experiment, and build with new primitives is like really, really, really like unparalleled, right? Like there's so much competition to kind of like get the attention of like, a Web2 developer to do anything. Whereas like, like crypto developers like are very eager to experiment and try the new technology, because there's kind of like more of an incentive to be early and ahead of like the next narrative and the next trend. And so that's kind of like how I think about it. I guess like going back to your question of like why Solana will be competitive. So I mean, here's my view of how things are going to go. Is there's going to be like multiple frameworks you can almost think of that like somebody can issue a payment through. So x402 will be one, AP2 will be another, like ACP will be another. And in all of these payment systems, the interesting question is like, how can we get payment tokens to like payment transfers on Solana to be like usable as kind of like a token that you can use like within these systems to kind of like verify that a transaction was spent. So this is natively possible in x402, and we're chatting with like the Google team, and we're chatting with like the Stripe team on how to do this for their payment systems as well. But basically you can think, okay, there's going to be multiple ways for agents to pay for things, whether it's going to be with a credit card or through a stable coin or through some other sort of payment system. Now, how do we get payments on Solana to be the most competitive rail, the cheapest and the fastest rail for them to settle on? And so that's where kind of like the question, like it really aligns with like a lot of the other work that we're kind of like doing on the core protocol, where today we already have something like 400 millisecond block times, median transfer fees are something like 1,000th of a cent. And we're continually thinking of ways like how do we improve like core performance of the blockchain to get down to 200 millisecond block times in like 2026, right? With some of the stuff that Anza is working on, and to keep like the transfer costs like this low as well. Like that's kind of some of the stuff that we're thinking about from like a core performance layer. And then the other side of it is kind of like what is like the tooling, the documentation, and the ecosystem around kind of like x402 on Solana. Like why would someone build in Solana versus some other framework, non-crypto native, or another blockchain ecosystem? The network effect of that is really like the quality of builders and the quality of resources that we're able to pull together. And that's where like all credit to like the amazing teams that are building on x402 on Solana already, teams like Corbits and PayAI and T54, and so many others that are building a lot of the core infrastructure, and application teams who are doing this as well. It's really, really great to see.
Nice. You spoke of a few teams there that are part of the ecosystem. We all know that Solana is hosting the biggest and best hackathons out there in crypto. And there was also the x402 hackathon, right?
Yeah.
What was the idea behind that, and what came out of this?
Yeah, so I mean, yeah, so I guess I'll tell you a bit about kind of like how X402 kind of like really blew up as a whole, and then how it blew up on Solana kind of like alongside of that. So, the standard was released in May, and then the actual implementation for it was, built by an ecosystem team, Notorious Dev from PayAI back in August. And then like for September and October, like maybe you were seeing kind of like 10,000 weekly transactions, like maybe $1,000 in volumes processed over X402 on Base and Solana, like every week. So like, people were experimenting with it, but there was no like real volumes or value to the kind of extent that we've gotten to today. And then pretty much during the last week of October, it's actually funny. So like we hosted a meetup at the Solana offices, and so while we were there, the Merit Systems team or Kevin from Coinbase had done a demo, kind of like with X402, and it was to like what was a server that he used? It was like this server called Ping, which was basically like an endpoint where you sent 10 USDC and you got like $10 worth of ping back, which was basically a X402 meme coin. And so like that kind of server with a meme coin was built. The second thing that kind of happened was the Merit Systems team built like X402 Scan, which was an explorer, which you could see kind of like the top servers, like how much volume was being done, how many transactions were being done across all these different networks. Suddenly you had like a really great explorer product where you had a ton of visibility of kind of what was going on in the X402 ecosystem, because like before it wasn't really clear, what was happening, to be totally honest. And then the third thing was like you had a bunch of these kind of like big Web2 partners like Cloudflare and Vercel, and Google put out AB2 where they support X402 that were kind of like lending their credibility to the standard as well. And so it was like the convergence of these three things that kind of really came together. And that last weekend of October, like there was a absolute it was like crazy. Like volumes had like 100x pretty much, because there were a bunch of these servers that were basically doing a similar to ping model, like some sort of like meme coin type transaction, something like that. People were, starting to build agents and other apps on this. Like this is how it goes, right? It's like there's like some speculation on the new trend or narrative, and then there's like people who like see it and like then just become aware of it and then want to try and start building with it. And literally that weekend, yeah, like I was like on the phone with some other people from the, Solana side, and we were like, let's just ship a hackathon as quickly as possible, like turned out the website in a day and then announced the hackathon like the next day. It was like that weekend happened. Tuesday we announced the hackathon, and then kind of like reached out to like a bunch of different partners on kind of like, who would be interested in kind of supporting this. And we got so much inbound interest from this, like Coinbase and Phantom and Visa and Solana ecosystem teams like Corebits and Gradient Network and Dark Research and Switchboard, Triton One. Like a bunch of people quickly came together, and the prize pool was something like 135K, and we had like over a 2-week sprint over like something like 500 submissions, which is like some of the most that we've seen in kind of like a hackathon. That too, like with a 48-hour lead time of planning and organizing. So it was very cool to see a bunch of those teams and projects are still working on what they were doing and continuing their work, which is obviously what you want to see at the end of a hackathon. So yeah, it was a great experience.
Yeah, also for me as a participant in the
Yeah, I would love to
hackathon,
hear.
it was really fun. And I loved what you said earlier about how developers are so excited to use these new primitives and just like get into the space and explore, because I had the opportunity to work with a really talented developer who I'd met in the Berlin scene,
Mm-hmm.
who didn't have an idea, just really wanted to work with this technology.
Yeah.
And I was like, I know exactly what you can do.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how to do it, but then just like experiencing that synergy was so magical.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering like what, like of the winning
That's
teams
awesome.
and all the teams, like what was created that really stood out that's like game changing? Because I know it's such a fresh new space, and infrastructure is being built now, like in the process, and was in the hackathon. So what do we have now?
Yeah, so I think like what we saw out of it were there were a bunch of like very cool teams that were building all different kinds of kind of like servers and applications on top of it. So like one product we saw kind of like a ton of traction with is kind of like these inference type servers for x402 that are now like some of the most popular servers today. A bunch of them came out of the Solana x402 hackathon. So AIMO.network, Block Run AI, like are just kind of like two of them that are on Solana today. Another really cool thing that we saw kind of come out of it is like this emerging space of kind of like games and how people can kind of like create games like to kind of like simulate interactions and activity between agents. So x402 Monopoly, which was launched by the T54 AI team, which was really cool, is basically like the system in which, you have like all the major LLMs like Claude versus like Gemini versus OpenAI, like GPT 5.2 versus Grok, all playing like Monopoly against each other and seeing kind of like what are the results of like different LLMs like interacting against each other, negotiating against each other, bartering against each other, competing against each other. Like this is kind of like a really interesting design space for kind of research of how like closed loop model systems kind of like look and interact. And we're actually working on writing a paper with those guys that should be published soon that people should definitely check out on kind of like the importance of like games in these early systems. Like it's cool because it parallels like also like the early takeoff of kind of like how like a lot of like AI systems and reinforcement learning systems were built like way back in like 2015 and 2016. Like games were always like one of those first use cases. So seeing that with x402, like which is one of the earliest like financial experiments with agents is very cool to kind of like see again. I think like another really cool thing that we saw was like we saw a couple of teams that were building different kinds of like tooling infrastructure to support x402 as a standard to help it make it easier for builders to basically build with 402. So like one really interesting thing that has kind of like been coming in parallel is like, today, like there's not great visibility or identity around these servers. Like, how do you kind of like do better discovery? Like, how do you know what server you're interacting with? And that's where kind of 8004 is this new standard for kind of like creating an identity registry for all different kinds of like agents and servers. So like you can basically think of it as like a NFT that like you can mint on like the Solana blockchain that will contain metadata, which contains information about like what is a server, like who runs it, like what is the reputation for it, and what can it basically do. And so like early primitives of 8004 were built, like that'll be coming to mainnet like over the next like week or two, which is like really, really exciting to see. Discovery is like a huge issue and problem. And then like you have something like T54 too, which is like building the trust layer for solutions with like identity verification, risk management, stuff like that. It was like yeah, like I'd say like that's kind of like broadly where we saw like a lot of interesting projects that people are like still continuing to work on. The last thing is always going to be like the viral like consumer applications. Like one of the tracks like we sponsored like was just like best use, and someone had like connected an x402 service to like kind of like this like physical toy that was like a companion that someone can basically like carry around that natively has an LLM that like you can like use to pay for services and stuff like that.
Tamagotchi 3.0.
Yeah, pretty much.
Nice.
Yeah.
So, but it sounds like there's lots of infrastructure, discovery tools, all of that being built right now. I know that we always have a lot of builders and people that are thinking about new projects that they can build out throughout the hackathons that are coming up this year as well. We know of the big ones. Maybe there will be another x402 one as well.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Nice. That's great to hear. Thinking about some real world use cases, what are the most compelling ones that you're seeing? I mean, you touched a little bit on that already, but on top of all the infrastructure and everything that's being built out right now, can you name a few things that come to mind?
Yeah, this is like literally like something that I'm thinking about a lot and maybe even gonna work on as a side project here is like I was mentioning, like how can you just like wrap an X402 over any API that people are using today and like offer it as kind of like a service? Because if someone does better discovery for it than like, the actual API publisher, then you can create an entire business model out of that. And Corbit's is working on a really cool product to make this like very, very easy, like in almost like a low code way for somebody to do, to basically like wrap any endpoint like with 402 to basically serve to like any ecosystem of developers that want to build with it. So that's like something that's very exciting to see. I think like in the tooling discovery space, like we're still seeing like kind of a lot of experimentation and building going on. And so that's like another area which I think like continually like as V2 support has kind of come out, like, like how can you do things like streaming payments and stuff like that? There are all these like cases like private X402 payments, like that are kind of like, like subtle features of like the payment standard that like might have like a use case. Like I think like that's like another area that I think is worth spending time. And then I think honestly what X402 really needs and like what will hopefully bring it to the next stage of development is like a really great breakout like user consumer type case, which might be like some sort of like social AI, interactive AI, like that like regular user can use, probably not even know they're using X402. Like maybe they're a crypto native user and like they like just can connect a wallet and kind of like pay micropayments for some sort of like service, whether it's like search or something more interactive than that, or even like a Web2 user that could be using an embedded wallet like on ramp and like pay without really knowing that they're using X402 or crypto. I think like great killer consumer applications are always like what drive technology standards like through like massive multitudes. And so like that's another thing that hopefully like we can kind of like see.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going all in on this personally. I'm just like gonna grind hard to try and change the media industry. But we're coming to the end of our time today, and there's one question that's like burning in my mind that I want to hear your take on. And that's like how you think things are going to shift with the current banking industry, because obviously like all these players are rushing in. They know that there's something disruptive happening here. So it seems like they want to be a part of it. They want to be friendly, but maybe they're scared also. Like,
yes,
how do you see things changing with that?
That's a great take. I think like to your point, like what also has made X402 pretty exciting is there's all these like Web2 players that are kind of coming to the space and like very interested in kind of like what's going on in agentic payments broadly. Like even outside of X402, like they just know of it as an agentic payment standard. Because like this is what people see. Like people see this as like this is going to be the new like it's going to be like a new economy almost, right? Like 20 years ago, like all of retail consumer products, like you would have had to go to a brick and mortar storefront to buy something. And then like suddenly people started like making stores on the internet and like e-commerce took off. And now like the amount of like e-commerce that is done probably like pales like the amount of like retail consumer that is actually done. Like it's this huge opportunity of like purchasing like internet services that came up. And now like the parallel is like, okay, everyone is kind of interacting with the agentic systems in kind of like these interesting ways, right? Like I'm going to ChatGPT or Gemini when I'm like researching like, like it's cold in New York right now. Like I'm like want to buy like a nice hat. Like what should I buy? Right? Or like I'm planning a trip to somewhere. Like what should I do? Like find me the cheapest flights and the best places to stay. Those are like humans like using LLM type systems, which like soon like natively, how can you do checkout like within these like places within these systems? I think like people see like a huge economic opportunity and being able to build at this layer. I think to your point, like, I don't think people really know like how it's going to shift and change maybe a lot of the fundamental ways that like the financial system is built today. Like credit for agents, like what does that even look like? Who's underwriting that? What are the risk parameters? If like your agent hallucinates and pays for the wrong service, like who's liable for this? Like these are all things that are kind of like unanswered and unclear right now. Um, but I think that like broadly speaking, like I really believe in like, blockchains and Solana as a technology that kind of like makes the world more efficient and makes like pricing more competitive. And for payments, like we've seen this already kind of like have like really massive tangible impacts on people's lives where it's like way cheaper to send money now, right? And like when that collapses, like, there are business models that are disrupted from kind of the traditional web 2 world. And I think like we'll see a similar thing kind of happen in this space as well, where like, card networks have been charging 3% for off merchants, like, from the beginning of time, right? And that like, if I'm a restaurant and I want like to be able to accept Visa credit, I have to like, pay a portion of that, like basically back to the network. Like maybe these systems like really change if you can do it in a cheaper, more trustless, elegant way on top of a blockchain system. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the future I want to see. Hopefully it stays cheaper too and doesn't get that creep up into inshedification, like
Yeah.
so many things. Well, wonderful. I think that was a super informative experience and exchange. And I know I learned a lot today. It's motivating me to keep building in this space and to just keep learning more about what other people are working on too. There's so much going on. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
do you have any closing
Yeah, I
thoughts?
guess closing thoughts. If you're building on x402 and Solana, please just like reach out to me. You can hit me up directly on X. Like, and yeah, like to your point, like I think this is one of the most exciting places to kind of build, not just in crypto, but just period. And so highly encourage people who aren't familiar with x402 to check it out, see if there's something that's interesting. If you have feedback on kind of like anything that we're doing on the Solana side, reach out. Like we're iterating and working on this a lot. And yeah, like would love to kind of connect with anyone that's working on x402, building an x402. And yeah, thanks a lot, guys, for having me. I also really enjoyed the convo.
Thanks so much for all your insights. There's the QR code that goes to the x402 page. There's
Awesome.
some great explanations on the Solana website around x402. Go check them out. As Rish said, reach out to him. And that all being said, thank you so much for joining us today. That was, yeah, super insightful, super happy that you came on. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Rish. That was
Thanks,
amazing. Guys. And see you next time on Media Guild, Lucas.
Bye-bye.
Sounds good. See you guys.